So if we pick things up in the Scotch game after knight takes d4 and what black chooses knight f6, white's happy to defend the e-pawn with bishop to b4, with knight to c3 and then bishop to b4 is the main line. A couple of other lines for black. Bishop to c5 when you can play I guess knight to b3, you can take the knight, or you can play bishop to e3. I don't think any of those are too bad for white. One other line that you may come across, instead of bishop to c5, after knight c3 there's a hairy line where black takes the pawn. It doesn't lose a piece, but it's messy. Takes on e4, queen e7, and now you can defend the knight with the queen, but you're either in a pin with the queen or the bishop, but you're either in a pin or you abandon the d4 knight. So f3, d5, bishop b5, bishop d7, takes, castles, and now after d takes e4, either f takes e4 is okay, with sort of a gambit line, except that you're going to get rook e1 in your face if you take it as black, and or just rook e1 straight away. Both are better for white. It's a little bit messy, but have a look at this position and see if you fancy playing it. I hope you do, otherwise the whole idea of playing the Scotch 4 knights isn't for you. But I think white's okay here, and should thrive. Black's pawns are a real mess, and white's got sort of good control of the centre. This poor old bishop on f8 isn't doing well. So the main line starts with bishop to b4, and we'll carry on. We take on c6 first and then play bishop to d3. You can't do that earlier because it abandons the knight on d4. I've seen youngsters play that, never mind. So white's made black put a pawn on c6, so black can use that to get a stake in the centre with d5. And now e takes d5. Either side now can make a check on the e file with the queen, but those aren't very interesting lines. And I think also there is an alternative with e5 here that you might look at one day. But the main line is e takes d5, c takes d5, castles, castles, and this is the start of a lot of analysis. I'd suggest you play the main line with bishop to g5. Instead of bishop to g5, Vladimir Kramnik tried h3 here, just saying, declaring their position to be easier and more balanced. Didn't win, but it created a bit of a stir, and I think Krzysztof Silecki has made this the basis of one of his opening books. But so something to look at. But bishop g5 is the main line. Why not? And now black usually plays either bishop to e6, defending the pawn, or c6. If we look at c6 first, I think the right move here is knight to a4. This isn't quite an attacking line in the same way that you might want out of an e-pawn opening, but I think it's a nice way to play chess. We're trying to make a point of this backward c-pawn as a weakness. The game might continue h6, rook e8 for black, and now c4, trying to loosen up those pawns and make them even worse. Bishop to d6 by black, and now takes, and now we've got an interesting position with a isolated but passed c-pawn, d-pawn. Knight to c3, bishop to e5, and we've got a position where white's worked hard to create a target, and that pawn must always be protected by black pieces. The position is about equal, but I hope you see that there's it's unbalanced, and you get a chance to play a position that I hope you'll like and understand well. And black's still struggling to get, I think, proper balance. White's well developed and has got this target to go for. So that's the line I recommend against c6. So going back, swapping c6 for a different move. Oh, bishop to e7, by the way, just loses a pawn after takes an f6, takes an f6, and queen to h5 forks d4, d5 and h7, so black can't do that. Defends the pawn is better with bishop to e6, and the big move this time is queen to f3. There are other ideas. Knight to b5 is a thing. Knight e2 I think is an idea, with the idea of coming around to d4 and taking on e6 when there'll be a weakness, a weak pawn on e6. So so you don't have to play like this, but I think queen f3, bishop e7 by black, rook fe1 is very natural. Again, h3 might be an idea here. And we have a little exchange of rook moves on the b file, and after h6 there's a try, takes on h6, and queen to e3, threatening all sorts of mate and mayhem on the king side. And if bishop to d6 here takes on h6, rook to b4, trying to cover various squares on the king side, and now white has a draw by perpetual check. So it's a common idea in these lines which I wanted to show you. Sometimes it's a draw like this, but sometimes it wins. In top chess you'd actually see one of the other plans, most typically knight to e2 here, but do have a look at these attacking ideas for white in these lines of the Scotch. I think the grandmasters know how to play their way out of them, but your opponents might not. So that's the Scotch 4 Knights variation.